There is a seismic shift that occurs in a woman's life as she approaches 40, a psychological transformation that society observes but rarely discusses openly. The change often manifests with startling suddenness. 1 week, she is the cornerstone of family life, managing schedules, preparing meals, and maintaining the household. The next, she is preoccupied with her phone, making mysterious purchases, and displaying a renewed interest in her appearance that seems disconnected from her established life. This phenomenon is far from isolated. Across countless communities, men find themselves witnessing the gradual transformation of their reliable partners into individuals chasing a vanished youth. The most perplexing aspect is the collective refusal to acknowledge the predictable nature of this crisis. We console ourselves with the belief that shared history and mutual investment provide immunity, but this is a dangerous fantasy. A profound psychological recalibration is underway in women during this life stage, and its activation window is typically between 35 and 45. The outcome is not a matter of chance, but of probability, with the only variable being the extent of the resulting damage. The woman at 40 is neurologically and psychologically distinct from the person you married. This evolution is not about gaining wisdom. It is a fundamental restructuring of her brain's reward system and motivational priorities. The individual who found deep satisfaction in nurturing a family at 30 can become driven by a desperate need for external validation at 40. This hunger, born from a perceived loss of identity, can override years of commitment and rational judgment. The core of this crisis often lies in an identity constructed upon a fragile base: physical appearance. From childhood, women receive a consistent cultural message that their worth is intrinsically linked to their desirability. For approximately 2 decades, this system functions effectively. Attention is plentiful, and her sense of value is regularly reinforced. Then, the natural aging process begins to withdraw this external validation. The reflection in the mirror no longer matches her internal self-image, not because of ugliness, but because of change. The face and body that were once primary sources of confidence now seem to blend into the background. This is not a superficial concern over wrinkles. It is a catastrophic collapse of a carefully constructed identity. Her entire framework for self-worth, built upon being seen and desired, begins to crumble. To understand the magnitude, consider a professional athlete whose entire identity is tied to physical prowess. The gradual decline of their abilities represents not just a career shift, but an existential threat. For a woman experiencing this erosion of her defining attribute, the psychological impact is profound. The danger emerges not from the aging process itself, but from the modern response to it. Instead of being guided toward graceful acceptance and the discovery of new sources of value, women are often encouraged to resist reality. They embark on a futile war against time, and the first casualty is frequently the stability of their marriage. A compliment that a younger woman would dismiss becomes a powerful neurochemical event for a woman in her 40s. It serves as tangible proof that she remains visible and desirable. This single moment of external validation can feel more significant than a decade of spousal devotion because it is perceived as being freely given, not obligatory. This creates a vulnerability that is often exploited. Women in this demographic are not inherently disloyal. They are experiencing a profound deficit. They crave the thrill of being chosen anew, a sensation that a long-term partner, by his very nature, cannot provide. His affection is seen as a given, a part of the marital contract. The attention of a stranger, however, feels earned and authentic. Once she experiences this potent reaffirmation of her fading identity, a dangerous threshold is crossed. She remembers the intoxicating feeling of being pursued, of existing as an object of fantasy rather than a pillar of routine. This memory creates a craving that a stable, predictable partnership cannot satisfy. The initial warning signs are often subtle. A husband might notice his wife speaking of her past with a newfound fondness. Stories about former boyfriends or youthful adventures are no longer recounted with embarrassment, but with a wistful nostalgia. This romanticization of the past indicates that her mind is beginning to disengage from the present. Carl Jung once noted, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." The woman approaching midlife is often not accepting the woman she has become. She is desperately trying to resurrect the girl she once was. This internal struggle manifests in predictable phases. It begins with a social shift, often toward a new circle of friends, particularly those who have recently divorced. These relationships function less as genuine friendships and more as echo chambers for discontent. During social gatherings that masquerade as relaxation, these groups engage in collective narrative building, where husbands are reinterpreted as oppressors and stable, homes are framed as prisons. Simultaneously, her consumption of social media becomes more than a pastime. It becomes research. The algorithm, designed to engage, feeds her a curated reality of transformation and reinvention. She is bombarded with stories of women who found themselves after leaving their marriages, of love after 40, and vibrant lives filled with excitement. This digital highlight reel stands in stark contrast to the mundane reality of her own life, fueling the belief that a more fulfilling existence is just one drastic decision away. The physical metamorphosis follows. What begins as a renewed interest in self-care can escalate into a frantic campaign against aging. Drastic diets, obsessive exercise regimens, and fashion choices, inappropriate for her age, signal a desperate attempt to recapture youth, not merely to maintain health. Every action is charged with the unspoken fear of becoming invisible. Finally, the emotional distancing occurs. She may demand more space, cite a need for self-discovery, or develop a schedule of mysterious commitments. Her emotional demeanor may swing between two unsettling extremes: constant irritability and picking fights, which serves to justify her growing dissatisfaction, or an unnervingly detached pleasantness, which masks the guilt of her emotional or physical exit. Society, rather than offering a corrective perspective, often amplifies this crisis. A constant cultural drumbeat tells her, "You deserve to be happy," framing personal fulfillment as the highest virtue, even at the expense of commitments, stability, and the well-being of others. The transformation occurring is not merely a shift in interests or moods. It is a deep neurological rebellion. As a woman ages, the very architecture of her brain's reward system is reconfigured. The chemical pathways that once flooded her with pleasure from simple, romantic gestures now require significantly more stimulation to generate even a faint response. The comfortable intimacy of a long-term marriage, which should be a source of security, becomes neurologically monotonous. Consider the contrast. To a young woman's brain, a simple gesture like a held hand can trigger a cascade of dopamine. For the same woman at 40, that same gesture may register as a faint, familiar signal, easily ignored. Her brain has been desensitized by years of consistent partnership. The romantic dinners, the planned getaways, the physical intimacy, all are processed by a system that now craves novelty and intensity. The husband, representing stability and predictability, becomes the neurological equivalent of background noise. He is safe, he is familiar, and in the economy of a brain seeking new thrills, he is bankrupt. This neurological starvation is the engine behind behaviors that seem inexplicably cruel. The woman who was once a picture of loyalty can become capable of breathtaking betrayal, not out of malice, but out of a desperate need to feel something, anything, intensely again. She mistakes the jolt of a secret affair or the flattery of a new admirer for a return to life, when in fact it is merely a spike in neurochemicals. The emotional affair or illicit relationship provides the earthquake her brain now requires to feel a tremor of feeling. The common thread in these situations is the husband's utter bewilderment. He claims he never saw it coming, yet the signs were not hidden. They were misinterpreted. The prolonged stares at her reflection were not vanity, but despair. The heightened reaction to a stranger's compliment was not politeness, but a gulp of water in a desert. The emotional distance was not stress, but a gradual departure. Carl Jung's insight that the pendulum of the mind oscillates between sense and nonsense, not between right and wrong, is perfectly illustrated here. From the husband's perspective, her actions are nonsensical. From her panicked, neurochemically deprived viewpoint, they are a perfectly logical pursuit of what her brain insists it needs to survive. The social environment acts as a powerful accelerant to this internal crisis. Her new cohort of divorced friends functions less as a support group and more as a validation cartel. They are united not by shared interests, but by shared narratives of liberation. Their conversations are a form of mutual brainwashing, where the language itself is twisted. Commitment becomes confinement, reliability becomes boredom, and the responsibilities of family life are reframed as sacrifices of the self. This group provides the necessary justification for the impending explosion, reframing a destructive act as a courageous one. Meanwhile, social media serves as a 24/7 propaganda machine for this new worldview. It is not a window into reality, but a funhouse mirror that distorts it. She is not comparing her life to other real lives, but to curated digital performances. The algorithm, a coldly efficient entity, identifies her insecurities and feeds them, showing her an endless stream of success stories born from divorce and reinvention. It never shows the quiet, painful aftermath, the loneliness, the financial strain, the regret, and the shattered trust of children. It sells the fantasy of the explosion, but never the reality of the rubble. This period is also marked by a critical divergence in how men and women experience midlife. A man facing 40 is often culturally anointed as a silver fox, entering a prime defined by accumulated resources and experience. His perceived value in the social marketplace may even increase. This knowledge provides a psychological cushion, allowing him to face aging with a degree of confidence. His midlife crisis, if it comes, often involves reclaiming youth through objects or experiences. A sports car, a motorcycle, and is often viewed as embarrassing, but not typically family annihilating. For a woman, the cultural narrative is brutally different. She is tacitly informed that her value is depreciating, that she is becoming invisible. This fundamental difference in psychological framing is everything. The man may feel a need to recapture youth, but the woman feels a need to escape the evidence of its passing. A 45-year-old man can be confident in his ability to attract a partner if he wishes. The knowledge alone is sufficient. A 45-year-old woman, however, often operates under the terrifying belief that her last chance to be desired is vanishing. This desperation does not allow for patience. It demands immediate and often reckless action. The final stages of this crisis are characterized by a targeted and deliberate unraveling. The most perilous moment in any long-term marriage is not when a wife receives general male attention, but when that attention is focused and personalized. It ceases to be an abstract concept of options and becomes a tangible possibility embodied in one man. This individual, whether a coworker, an old flame, or a new acquaintance, becomes the living vessel for her. Fantasies of escape and renewal. Once this specific connection is made, her behavior undergoes a distinct shift. She will, of course, insist on its innocence, but the husband will observe a new protectiveness over her phone, a change in the frequency or tone with which she mentions this person, and an increased secrecy around her schedule. Her emotional state will solidify into one of two troubling patterns. Either she becomes perpetually argumentative, actively building a case for her departure by magnifying every flaw in the marriage, or she becomes detachedly serene, a performance meant to alleviate her own guilt and deflect suspicion. Both are indicators that the emotional departure is complete. The physical or official one is merely a formality. At this point, attempts to salvage the marriage are often futile. The neurological and psychological forces at play are too powerful. She is not making a rational choice between two partners. She is choosing a fantasy of rejuvenation over the reality of her life. Even if the affair collapses and she attempts to return, the foundation of the marriage is irreparably shattered. The woman who comes back is not the wife who left. She is a stranger, carrying the memories of another man and the ghost of a fantasy that her husband can never live up to. The trust and shared reality that form the bedrock of a marriage are gone forever. What is particularly tragic is the subsequent rewriting of history that often occurs. To justify the immense damage caused, the entire narrative of the marriage must be retrofitted. The husband is recast from partner to villain. Happy memories are edited into scenes of a performance. Minor disagreements are inflated into evidence of long-term abuse. This historical revisionism is a psychological necessity. To admit that she destroyed a fundamentally good life for a transient feeling would be too devastating to bear. She must paint herself as the hero of a story of liberation, not the architect of its destruction. The children inevitably become collateral damage in this war against aging. She may tell herself they are resilient, that they will understand her need for happiness, but children do not prioritize a parent's existential crisis. They prioritize stability, predictability, and the intact family structure that forms their entire world. They will struggle for years to comprehend why their mother's need to feel desired was more important than their need for a secure home. Carl Jung also said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." In this context, the husband himself becomes the primary source of irritation. His very presence is a constant, living reminder of the life she is trying to escape. A life of routine, responsibility, and the passage of time. He embodies the mortality she is frantically trying to outrun. Her actions, therefore, are not ultimately about him, his qualities as a partner, or the state of the marriage. They are about her own profound inability to accept the natural arc of a human life. The modern woman was largely unprepared for this inevitability, raised on a diet of empowerment mantras that champion feelings over duty and personal happiness over collective responsibility. She lacks the cultural and psychological tools to navigate this transition with grace. When the feelings of youth fade and happiness becomes more complex than mere excitement, she is told by popular culture to follow her heart, leading her to mistake a biological and neurological panic for a spiritual calling. For the men left in the wreckage, the only solace is the understanding that her departure was not a referendum on his worth as a husband. He could have been perfect, and she might still have left. He could have been terrible, and she might have stayed. Her actions were dictated by an internal crisis of identity and value that he was powerless to resolve. He was not the cause of the storm. He was simply the landscape it washed over. The woman he married, the one who made those vows, truly meant them. But that woman was a previous version, neurologically and psychologically. The woman who left was a different person, one terrified of time, and in her terror, she was willing to sacrifice everything to feel its passage a little less. The aftermath of this psychological detonation is a landscape of profound and often silent devastation. While the wife may initially frame her departure as a brave step toward self-actualization, the reality that inevitably follows is far removed from the empowering fantasy sold by her social circle and the digital world. The initial high of freedom and novelty, much like any drug, is fleeting. The thrilling secrecy of an affair is replaced by the mundane logistics of separate households. The intoxicating compliments of a new lover eventually give way to the familiar negotiations and compromises required by any real relationship. The stark truth emerges. She has not escaped the challenges of human connection. She has merely traded a deep, weathered partnership for a shallow, unproven one, all while carrying the baggage of a discarded life. The children, once rationalized as resilient, now bear the invisible wounds of the shattered family. The stability they relied upon is gone, replaced by the shuffling of duffel bags between two homes and the complex emotional calculus of divided loyalties. They witness their father's quiet grief and their mother's often frantic attempts to justify her choices. The narrative of mom's happiness rings hollow when contrasted with the palpable loss of a unified family life. These children become reluctant archivists of a broken home, their own future templates for relationships now scarred by the example of commitment easily abandoned. For the husband, the betrayal is multifaceted. It is not merely the physical or emotional infidelity. It is the wholesale erasure of a shared history. The decades of building a life together are retroactively invalidated, rewritten as a period of oppression or dissatisfaction. His identity as a provider and partner is shattered, leaving him to grapple with a profound sense of failure and confusion. He is often thrust into the role of a single parent while simultaneously managing his own grief, all while being culturally conditioned to suppress his pain and move on. The support system that often rallies around the wife, praising her courage, is conspicuously absent for him. His suffering is a silent, private burden. Financially, the destruction is systematic and severe. The accumulated assets of a lifetime, the home, the savings, the retirement funds, become subjects of brutal negotiation. The legal system in many cases is structured in a way that can penalize the stability he provided. He may find himself working to support two households, his own standard of living diminished while funding the very new beginning that caused his ruin. The financial security he worked for years to build is often the first casualty in the war against aging, dismantled to fund a fantasy. Perhaps the most insidious aspect is the societal narrative that continues to haunt him. He is expected to be understanding, to avoid appearing bitter, and to gracefully accept the destruction of his family as a valid expression of his wife's journey. Any display of anger or profound hurt is pathologized. He is denied the simple human right to be the victim of a devastating act, instead being positioned as an obstacle to someone else's self-discovery. This enforced silence compounds the trauma, isolating him in his grief. Meanwhile, the wife's liberation frequently curdles into a harsh reality. The divorced friends who cheered her on now represent a social circle, defined by shared resentment, a poor foundation for a fulfilling life. The exciting new partner often fails to live up to the idealized fantasy. He is, after all, just another human being with his own flaws, baggage, and aging body. The thrill of being desired inevitably fades, and she is left with the same existential questions about aging and purpose, now compounded by the consequences of her choices, the judgment of her children, the financial strain, and the loneliness of a life untethered from its history. Carl Jung offered a crucial perspective that speaks directly to this turmoil. Wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration of the contraries. The healthy path through midlife involves integrating the youthful self with the mature self, finding new value in wisdom and depth, not by amputating the past. The crisis described is a violent refusal of this integration. It is an attempt to cut away the portions of life that testify to the passage of time, the husband, the family, the responsibilities, in a futile effort to remain the young woman she once was. This refusal of wholeness dooms her to a fractured existence, forever chasing the ghost of her former self. For the man navigating this catastrophe, the path forward is agonizingly slow. It requires a painful understanding that the woman he loved, in the form he knew her, is gone. It demands a focus on rebuilding his own life and providing a stable, loving environment for his children, even as his own world feels shattered. It involves reclaiming his own identity outside of the marriage, rediscovering who he is as an individual, not just as a husband and father. This process is not about winning or getting even. It is about survival, and eventually, the slow, arduous work of rebuilding from the rubble. The ultimate, tragic irony is that the very thing she was fleeing, the comfortable, predictable intimacy of a long-term partnership, is often the very source of strength and meaning that can guide a person through the challenges of midlife and beyond. The shared history, the deep knowing of another person, the quiet solidarity of facing life's inevitable declines together. These are the assets that are foolishly liquidated for the temporary stock of novelty. She sold a castle for a handful of magic beans, only to find they were just ordinary beans after all. The warning, therefore, is not just for men to be vigilant, but for a culture to re-examine the narratives it sells to women. The glorification of perpetual youth and the prioritization of fleeting feelings over enduring commitments is a recipe for widespread unhappiness. True empowerment lies not in the freedom to leave, but in the wisdom to build, to nurture, and to find profound, evolving meaning in the different seasons of a single whole life. The real crisis is not aging. It is the failure to find value in who we are becoming, and in the quiet, deep, and lasting things we have built. Did this reveal the hidden truths you've been seeing, but couldn't name? The midlife transformation is complex, but you don't have to navigate it in the dark. We decode the unspoken realities of relationships, psychology, and modern life. This is just the beginning. The patterns continue, and understanding them is your first line of defense. Don't miss what comes next. Subscribe now, and unlock the insights that everyone else is ignoring. Your clarity is waiting.